guess Bill, do your thing. There he goes. Recording has started, so let's be careful what we say, guys, because it will be recorded and distributed all over the world on YouTube. And we're just actually this one really will probably be able to be maybe shown to anybody. So what we're talking about today is kind of continuing on payroll control development, basically. So last time, our last session, which was just yesterday, we went ahead and went into all the payroll, not all the payroll control fields, but we pretty much went through one payroll control. We just took anyone at random, and we went through every single fast tab. We explained the overriding segments. We explained the overriding segments mapping. We talked about calc orders, and we talked about control groups and how it's so important to make sure that every control that's in the master control group is on every single employee. And if you're not sure about that, even in today's session, we kind of ran a report to figure out which ones weren't. But it's really important as the designer of a payroll control to be the responsible party to not only finish that control, but to make sure that you build a little mini control group and copy it to all the employees. It's your responsibility to do that, and please don't forget that part, because then otherwise people like Linda will receive that message, which is that this payroll control is not there for that employee. And by the way, I did send a note to Bill to put a work order out there to at least add the employee ID on that message as well. Okay, so what we're going to do in this session is we're really going to focus on calc method, and we're going to talk about kind of how we put together multiple steps, which is what they're called, to achieve the goals that we have in this computation, whatever the computation may be. And so what we'll do is we're probably going to start with just looking at a bunch of different controls and trying to explain them. And then we'll further probably go ahead and do a little tracing of them, and I'll show you what that all means. And then we'll start mucking with them maybe. We'll start either copying one over, and maybe that's one of the better things to do would be to say at least let's take one that's fairly complicated, and let's build another kind of version of that, if you will. So the first thing to do is to first understand that when we click on calc method, we talked about this yesterday, on every control you'll have one or multiple lines and with an effective date on other lines after the first one. Typically the first one is blank, which means that's the initial design of that control. And then if we wanted to go ahead and do something different, and when we say do something different, what we really mean is something different in the algorithm, not values. So again, I'll just restate that FICA, this is not a good example, but FICA is 6.2%, and next week it becomes 6.3%. That is not what we're talking about here. That is done somewhere else with a different effective date. What we're talking about is they say, well, FICA is great, 6.2 up to a maximum limit, but now we're going to multiply it by some other thing and then add some other thing and do something else, something all new to the whole world. We've never seen this before. That would be the reason why you'd have another line here, because that new line would then connect to a bunch of new steps, who would be, quote unquote, the new algorithm. So if I click on here and click on steps, this is the steps that make up this control, and I'm not explaining all this right now. We're going to come back to this, and you will get to know this very well. But if I just copy, just to kind of just walk through the copy and said effective 0701, voila, click here. It's a complete duplicate of the steps that you saw previous, and generally speaking, we invite you to switch your description slightly, because you're there for a reason. Something's different. So can you explain through this verbiage what the difference now is? You can see here we're saying use a bracket rate times a union rate. So this is actually how we do accrual life insurance, and again, we'll look at this a little bit later and try to learn more about what we're doing there. And I kind of know what you're doing there, but I'll pretend I don't know. And so I'll try to read it as if I'm reading a different language. So that's kind of the first thing to understand. But what I want to do is step back a little bit and talk about method steps. And so what I'm going to do now is kind of close this screen, and I'm going to close this screen, and we're going to go into this area in the calculation area under administration payroll, method step and method step classes. Method step classes are just a nice simple way to sort of group method steps into different types of method steps, and it's user definable. We generally have them already set, and then you'll see where they're actually set. So here are the ones that are in the system right now as these are the different types of method steps, if you will. Notice this section right there. So all of the new method steps that are added, if you will, by K-12 Enterprise have that method step class. And so we're doing that on purpose to kind of so you can see all ours together. But there's another way to sort of back into them, and I'm going to show you that as well. So these are all the different method steps that are used for different kinds of calculations. Some are simple math. Some are something based on their age. Some are base amount based and so forth. So we'll kind of see how that kind of connects when we go see the method steps, which we'll do right now. So we'll go ahead and look at the methods. These are the method steps, method steps is what they're called. This table is a table that you really don't want to start editing. My advice is to never edit this ever. It's kind of the only other example that we've shown where you can edit it, and I've advised you not to, is in the retirement category codes, similar as this. It's pretty much auto-populated by us when we go ahead and push a new version into your platform. So part of what Ben does in his group is that if they know that we've invented a new method step in this new release, he will have a SQL script already designed that will go ahead and write that record out for you. So suffice to say, these method steps are not to be touched. Because if you do, I don't know what will happen. We don't want to do that. So they really are temperamental. It'd be nice if we could make them so that you couldn't edit them. You certainly can do that through security, but remember, all of you guys are super users within your clients' databases. So, be careful. Don't go over here and start changing this, because you can see I can change it. And I just did, and anyway, so that's not probably a good thing. So that's the first sort of warning. You can import these method steps, but we generally are going to go ahead and write them through a SQL script, so you won't have to worry about it. Okay. The method step, if you forget the class code, I'm going to move this column because I find it a little bit confusing having it there. I'm going to put it there. It's a little bit more logical. Okay. Because ultimately, when you're building your calculations, whatever calculation it is, you're basically stringing together multiple method steps. And all these method steps are working on creating the algorithm, basically. Algorithms are mathematical computations to determine a desired result. And so a lot of these are just different pieces that move dollars around. Some are just simple movements and so forth. Some are more complicated. Some are very hard to understand, and some of them have nothing to do with you guys. You may see some in here that have something to do with Saskatchewan or something. I don't know. There's some odd ones in here. Let me see if I can find a super odd one. Yeah, I'm just looking to see, because I know there's some really oddball ones in here. Yeah, there you go. British Columbia tax reduction. So that's British Columbia. You probably wouldn't know that, but that's what that really is. So there's some Canadian capabilities in here that we never use. So we don't really use all of them. We've never deleted any of them. So all of them are really there, plus the ones that we've put in. One thing also to note is that function number, that last column. That function number is really when the code actually executes, it actually just does it by those function numbers. So the function numbers it's a big case statement, basically. So if it goes to 382, which is that first row, it says case is 382, do this. Amount is amount multiplied by taxable. What that really simply means, well, I'll explain that as we kind of go further into it, so I won't explain it now. But after this session, you should be able to think through what that first line is telling you. Matter of fact, after this, a good chunk of them will become obvious to you. Let's hope so, at least. Okay, so we got the step class code, which again puts them in different groups. Again, you can always filter on one and kind of put them all together. So I'll filter this value, and there's all the simple math calculations. So again, you could do it a different way, of course, which is to break this filter and then sort on that. And some are not anything, but then a lot of them are. So again, these are just another way to look at them. It makes them much more organized when you sort of do it this way. They'll start to make more sense as you learn more about it. Okay, so let's talk about these other columns, and I'll explain them the best I can. And let me just kind of open some of these up. Okay. And let me just tab through. Okay, it's one of these screens that I'm actually doing something wrong. Yep, I actually see, look at that, I'm doing something wrong. Discard my changes. Thank you very much. Got to be careful. It's really easy to muck around in here. That's why we don't really get in this screen very often. Okay, so I'm going to start here with bracket type code, and I'm going to go ahead and filter for bracket type code doesn't equal quote quote. In other words, has something in it. Okay. So we're going to talk about brackets. Brackets basically are multiple rows of something, grids if you will, that do something. And so that maybe a good example is everybody knows the tax grids you get in the back of the circular E for the annual tax withholding, where it says if you make a certain amount, it's this plus another percent, it's this another percent, and so forth. So that's an example of maybe a limit and tax percent tax bracket type code. And so brackets are really, they're all basically one table. They're called brackets and bracket detail. It's really just two tables. I think it's bracket header and bracket detail. It's one table, but then when you set up a bracket, you tell it what type of bracket it is. And when you say what type of bracket it is, it then uses different columns. And so when we actually go look at our brackets in a little while, we'll get there in a few minutes, if you actually go into the detail for different types of brackets, you'll see different columns are showing. And so what we really are saying is that the bracket is kind of a multi-purpose concept used for different kinds of things in which different columns are actually kind of used. And so then the method steps speak to that, if you will. And so they know, because it's a limit in tax percent, that they're going to go after only certain columns within that. And it becomes intuitive because all you have to do is find a bracket of one type and open up the page, and you can kind of see what columns are filled in. And that's kind of how we reverse engineer to understand how to use brackets in different ways. So the kinds that we use a lot, you'll see there's withholding, limit in tax percent, quantity, deduction. These are all different kinds used in different scenarios. And when we get to the brackets, this will make more sense. So what we're doing with this method step is simply to say that if you pick this method step and then you go and pick which bracket to apply, because you're going to be forced to, as soon as you pick one of these method steps, it basically is going to require you to say, well, okay, which bracket is connected. So when we're doing FIT and you pick a particular method step and it's going ahead and says, let's say, limit and tax percent, then when you do the F4 and you do a lookup on all the brackets, it's only going to show you the brackets that are limit and tax percent type. And furthermore, you must fill it in. If you were to do a calc and you hadn't put in a bracket where one of these method steps that require a bracket, that's really what bracket type code, why it's filled in here, then it will error out. You'll get a pretty fundamental error in the system at that point, because that means the entire payroll control is not constructed in a way that's tenable to the system. So that's one of the first things to know is that when you pick a step that has a bracket type code, you have to pick a bracket and you're limited to the type that's here. And so it's important to understand the different types and kind of how they're used. And again, as we look through it, we'll understand some of them. I probably today won't explain all of them, but give you skills on how to look yourself into different areas and to learn what the system is already doing and using that to help you figure next step. And that's pretty much how all of us kind of work payroll controls, is kind of find something similar, try to understand it, and then try to take it now to the applicable situation that's at hand. Okay, use payroll rate and then rate code used. So payroll rate, that to me seems unusual. Let me just kind of go ahead and kill that out. And let's add another filter, payroll rate. Yeah, and amount is union rate. So in the system, the way the system is organized here, for the most part, when this is checked, then it looks here to see what type of rate are we referring to. These are particular steps that are, well, they're basically based on employee rate. For instance, these, and here's two classics right here. I'm trying to highlight them. So notice those two. The first one says amount is employee rate, and the second one is amount is employer rate. Both have that checked. One has rate used as employee, and one is employer. So really what those method steps mean is that during the calculation, if it sees one of these little method lines, it says amount is emp rate. It goes out and figures out what is the value for that employee for that rate code. When I say that rate code, just like I told you before, when you pick one of these method steps that have a bracket type code, you have to put a bracket code in. When you create one of these that are basically rate driven that use a payroll rate, you must put a rate code in. and it's required. So some of them are blank, which, right now I kind of understand that because these 3 are ones that we added, which are all union rates. So I kind of understand why those are blank. And this actually is using a bracket, so I'm kind of a little confused. I mean, my thought process is these checkboxes are kind of erroneous. So I'm not really positive about these, why they're checked, nor are some of these. So I'm just not completely sure why it's actually checked in those cases. So I'm not going to worry about it, but you'll have to see if we get any errors if you practice with some of those that have the check and don't have this filled in or aren't the 3 union ones. Like, for instance, this one here, taxable as amount divided by bracket tax percent rate 0 OK. Well, I know what that one is. That's a K-12 one, but I'm not sure why that is checked. I would think that doesn't need to be checked, and so forth. So anyway, well, maybe we can look into that further. But that's kind of the basic convention, is that use payroll rate. Usually one of these will be filled in, and that's pretty much that. The next 2 columns we can ignore. We don't use the pay structure capability of the system. We have grades and steps based on jobs, so we have a much different way of attacking some of the same things that this system has another capability to do, but however was inadequate to meet our requirements. So we haven't used it. We haven't removed these 2 columns, but you guys can pretty much decide to remove them. I am going to remove them because they keep coming up, and I really shouldn't waste my time. Okay. This next one is requires employee auth info. So let's go ahead and click on that one. I like that one. That one actually is, I think, a valid one. Okay, employee auth info. Yeah, again, I'm not sure on these guys how they're working because, again, it requires an employee auth info value, but it doesn't have a bracket type. So I'm not sure. Again, I have to think about it a little bit. Oh, I see. Add other auth amount. Tax amount is increased by amount from employee other auth info. And so I think at that point, it's not a bracket, so it doesn't have a bracket type code, but it's still trying to get the additional amount, if you will, to sort. It's like additional withholding, but yet in the other auth area. So I think what it's designed to do is you do remember this, that the payroll control is connected to a reporting authority on the payroll control card. So it's expecting then, that's why that checkbox is there, it's checking to make sure that employee then, if this is active control, has another auth record, and then it grabs that amount, any additional amount, and adds it to the amount, or I guess in this case, taxable amount. And we'll explain that in a little bit. So anyway, I don't want to explain too much because I want to talk about the 4 buckets. The next column, bracket status selection mode, is something internal to the system, and it's not really used at all. So again, that's a column which you can just get rid of. It doesn't really do anything. Okay, last thing I want to show is the function. If I add function, is again the same way to get to the K-12 concept. 2000 is, and if I do this in order, this is the first step that K-12 added, and the last step that we're added is 2042. Okay, if you get ever an error where it says it can't find 2043 as an example, that means that for some reason we failed in loading the method step onto your system. We put the programming on and somebody actually used it in a payroll control, but the actual method step is not physically there, which is probably doubtful because I'm not sure how you would have got it in on a, so it's kind of almost doubtful that ever would happen. But we do need to check that, and it's something that we need to make sure is we're always up to date on, quite honestly. And that's, again, across the board to anybody listening to this call. We need to always state, and maybe, Bill, I'm just saying this to you, maybe we need to always in every release kind of have a blurb in there to say our highest step should be 2042, just so that everybody knows that they could just check their system once a release just to confirm that they have the same highest step as possible. One thing to note is that you don't want any gaps. So, okay, I'm coming in here and I don't see any gaps, but if you see any gaps, we got a problem. So there should be no gaps as well. Okay, we don't plan to skip any gaps. We're not going to retire method steps. We just stop using them. Somebody doesn't care about them anymore, fine. But, again, method steps are just snippets of code, snippets of algorithms that we then piece together to create a full algorithm. That's really the purpose of what method steps are. So anyway, so that's just a little bit about method steps. I'm now going to explain the 4 buckets because you'll notice in a lot of this, and you're probably maybe getting a little confused. Let's see if I can see all of it in one screen. No, I don't see it all in one screen. So let me see if I can see examples. All right, so we see a field called adjusted. We see a field called amount. We see something called taxable. And if you go further, you should see something called temp. I'm trying to find temp. I just don't see a lot of temp. One thing I know I can do is I can sort by code and probably go down to temp. There we go. Temp, 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 temp. Temp, temp, temp. Temp is taxable. Okay. So I want to explain the 4 buckets. You should write on a piece of paper, think about it, and say, what the heck are you talking about, Andrew? I don't understand it. All right. So when you're doing a payroll journal, and you guys who have experience with our system know that we have a field called amount or payroll amount, and we have a field called taxable amount. Payroll amount is really amount in this vernacular. Taxable amount on the payroll journal is taxable. Okay, so anytime you see amount, it's really payroll amount, and if you see taxable, it's taxable amount. Then we have temp and adjusted. Temp and adjusted aren't real. They're fake. They're just kind of scratch pads, if you will, during the calculation itself. They don't end up on the journal line anywhere. They die a slow death as it goes, as it puts the record into the journal. It's just gone. But it's very useful to sort of move dollars around and hold them over there while you're moving something around. And if you kind of think about a math formula, you kind of sometimes you're doing something on a calculator and you get a total and maybe write that total over on a piece of paper, and then you clear it and do some more math and you want to add the 2 results together. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when you just have 2 amounts to kind of work with. It's kind of like, you're throwing balls in the air and you only have 2. You really can't juggle. And so they kind of put 2 more what I call cursor or temp values out there for you to work with. And so some steps are moving in and out of those 2 cursor values or those temporary values. One's called temp, the other one's called adjusted. Don't think of them in any way except as temp 1 and temp 2. There's no reason to think that adjusted's any different than temp and temp's any different than adjusted. They're just 2 different temp values. Think of it from that perspective, you'll be much better. So now we're reading some of these, we start to understand them a little bit better. Some of them I'll say. And let's just look at maybe a simple movements now. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. Okay, good. Okay. So this is some of the simplest ones that we have. So adjusted is amount. But what we mean by that is the adjusted value is equal to whatever's in the amount. So even though we use an English is, as opposed to using the equal sign, which I always found interesting on this. Whoever wrote this, they expressed it with an is. That's what it is. So adjusted becomes equal to whatever amount is. Adjusted equals amount, but we're taking it times a -1. So if the amount is $100, adjusted becomes -$100. So that one's understandable. Adjusted is taxable. Adjusted is minus taxable. Adjusted is temp. Amount is adjusted. Amount is minus adjusted. I mean, those first 9 are really straightforward. There's absolutely nothing hard to understand. They're really simple. I don't know. Taxable is temporary saved value. I think that there's actually probably another 5th hidden field that I've never actually used myself, but I do believe that you do have another temporary value that you could do. So you can actually see there, temporary value saved is taxable, which means whatever's in the taxable field at this moment, save it into a 5th place called temporary. And I think when they say temporary saved value, they're really talking about something not temp, but something different now. And then taxable is being restored. You can even see where it says restore taxable, save taxable. So that's really a 5th element. Never seen anybody really use that. So I haven't really spent much time. I don't know what these stacks do. Move into adjusted, the next value in the first in, last out buffer stack. I've never quite honestly used that. So I'm really not sure what they are. So, and I've been building controls now for over 10 years. So if I've never seen it, maybe I should, but I just don't know where we would actually use these guys right here. But so some of those I know aren't really that exciting. I've never used these actually. But I can see where they'd be advantageous. This is just reversing the amount. So the amount in adjusted goes to amount, and the amount goes to adjusted. You're just swapping them. And actually, I've done that in 2 movements where actually I never realized I could do it in 1 movement. One of the kind of prides that people take in building these calculations is trying to do as few steps as possible. So this is a nice step to maybe do something that, we might say, oh, adjusted goes to temp, and then amount goes to adjusted, and then temp goes to, we might do it like in 3 steps that you can do in 1 step. I never really even thought about using these guys, but I'm sure they're pretty clean to work with. These are pretty traditional. Taxable is adjusted, and you can kind of see all those. So those are pretty straightforward. Let's see if I can then kind of go to, let's just do a math one, simple math. Okay, these are all really simple too. So a taxable is increased by adjusted. So remember, the other ones were a movement, meaning that this amount becomes wholly what this amount has in it currently. These are similar, but it's an additive movement, meaning that taxable is, let's say, $500, and let's say adjusted is $100. By that first item right there, taxable is going to become $600. So there it's different. It's not replacing it with the $100. It's taking the $500 and adding the $100 to it. So now it becomes $600. So taxable is increased by adjusted. Okay? So forth and so on. I mean, really, all of them are straightforward. This one's obviously a little bit more complicated. And we're going to talk about base amounts in a little bit, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. Trying to think of any others interesting here. Yeah, this is one that we might have done. No, I guess actually I don't know where this is one of theirs, employee FTE. Amount is amount multiplied by employee FTE. One thing to look about is to say, and it's hard to know this, but that FTE is not the employee job FTE because this is not one of our steps. So that only could be the standard FTE that came on the employee card. So that's kind of what that is for. And again, I don't think we ever would use that for anything, but it's just something that's out there. All right, so that's simple movement. Let me get into some more complicated ones. Try not to get into the simple movement, limiting. Where is the clearings? Let me see. 0. What are the zeros called? Limiting. Oh, okay, fine. Well, and clearing. Let me just do this one. Okay. Well, there you go. Okay. So that becomes a very useful one. 0 the adjusted amount, 0 taxable, 0 temp. That actually is a perfect representation of the 4 buckets right there. So simple example there. And limiting, yeah, some of these are a little bit more difficult. Trying to find one that's logical. Yeah, some of these are not really all that logical. I think at this point it might be simpler to open up controls now and start working through them. With all this learning, we're now going to work through some controls. So let's go to payroll controls, and let's start with something simple. Let's set this for deduction. Okay, and let's just take, hopefully I'm going to find an easy one. I don't know. Let me think. I'll just pick, I don't know if I want to pick this one or not, but I'll pick this one. At PIA, after tax, Perkins Educational Association dues. Okay, and we looked at this before just to remind ourselves. This is an after tax. We know it because it's deduction. It has its own category. It has a reporting authority, which is important. This calculate checkbox is very important. We talked about this last time, where you can have a payroll control and you can have method steps, but without that checked, it's one of the areas that might be causing you a failure for it to be calculating. So you do need to make sure that is checked. Nice thing to say is if I want to take it out of production, I can uncheck this and it won't calculate, even though it's still in the master calc order. So again, that's a different way to look at it. All right, calc method. This one doesn't have a calc method. Am I looking at this correct? Yep. This one has a calc method, but notice the description is blank. Is that a good thing? Not at all. We want to make sure it always has a description. It doesn't require it, but just for our own kind of later on, somebody has to maintain this control. That doesn't help them even have any sense of what the heck is going on. Let's take a look at it and see if we can actually come to a description. Okay. All right. So this one's actually very, very easy, but it does illustrate and it does allow us to move into our next learning, which is base amounts. So on this first step, and let me kind of explain this at a high level first, and then we'll kind of come back and drill at it. The way I interpret this is that it's first testing to see if the person's having any earnings in this batch, and if it is, it's aborting. But if they do have earnings, then what it's doing is the amount is based on an employee rate, and it's switching the sign. Negative amount just simply means, and let's just actually take a look at that one, just as an example. Amount is minus amount. Okay, so $100 becomes negative $100. Remember, deductions need to be negative. Okay, amount is emp rate, and are you going to have them put in that rate as a negative value? Probably not. So when it says amount is employee rate, it means that literally. If it was going to be amount is negative employee rate, that's what it would have said. So it doesn't say amount is minus employee rate. It says amount is employee rate. It's a positive value. So I got to switch the sign. Okay, so that's kind of just basic 2 steps. Can't do that in 1 step that I know of type of steps. But these first 4 are interesting, and you're going to see them appearing all over the place, basically. And so the question really is, why are they there, and what are they doing? So let's take a look at it a little bit closer. This first one is add base amount ADJ. So let's just read what it says. Adjusted is increased by base amount. So it is one of those additive ones. Remember I told you when it says it's increased, it means if adjusted had an amount, then what it really means is that amount's going to get increased by the amount that comes in from the computation of base amount. That's what that really means. Adjusted is going to be increased. If it already has a value, it will be increased by the value that's resolved by computing base amount. Okay, now the thing to understand is the first step. So because it's the first step, it can't be a value in adjusted. It has to be 0. So really you could look at it maybe in a different way to say amount is equal to base amount, or adjusted is equal to base amount. And again, I'm wondering if they have an example where it could have been just simple as saying adjusted is base amount. I don't know if I see one, and that's probably why, a lot of times you just pick the one that is good enough, and I don't see one. You could, whoops, I hope I didn't change that, did I? That is increased by, oh yeah, I did. Yeah, you got to be careful. Got to be really careful there, because what I tend to want to do is start doing like a filtering. That's what you can't filter on here. But what you can do is click in here, and then you can do a little bit of work. And so you can do description, and you can say, okay, I want to look for adjusted is. Yeah. Well, adjusted is set to minus base amount. I mean, it'd be a negative, which I'm not sure you want. I'm just trying to think, are there any others? There's Quebec.
Adjusted as amount?
No, adjusted as amount means that it's taking, remember, the amount field and moving it to the adjusted. The amount field has nothing in it right now. The base amount is not coming from the algorithm, it's coming from somewhere different, which I haven't explained yet. So I'm going to explain that in a second. Anyway, let's just escape that. So what we really are saying is, and if we look at this more closely, adjusted is increased. We know it starts at 0 by base amount as defined by this code. And so what I'm going to do now is leave this screen, and we're going to go to that earn bone. I'm going to do a Control-C there just to make sure I get the right value. I'm going to close, 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 and now we're going to base amounts. Okay, and these are all the base amounts that have been set up in Perkins, at least in our test version at this point. It's kind of difficult to look at these sort of straight up because the base amount's only relevant when it's used in a payroll control. And so we don't really necessarily know what payroll controls it's connected to. I don't think you're able to see it that way. But we can go and filter for this because I can just go ahead and put this in. And by the way, that doesn't work very well because it's got that pipe. Pipes are bad, and so I am going to go ahead and remove that and just go find it manually. The reason that didn't work, by the way, and earn bone is what I want right there, is that the pipe is also a filtering construct. And so when we say earn pipe bone, it's actually looking for a code that has earn or bone in it. It's not actually looking for earn bone itself. So I don't know if it would work differently if I were to type it in like this. I'm just going to try it. Same thing. It gives you the same results. Let's see if we can go ahead and fix that. No, I know I've done this the other day where you actually can put it in something, right? I mean, does anybody know on the nav side how we could possibly filter for that, or is that just not going to be filterable? I mean, would it be better just to kind of go and do something like that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And that's, or probably, since we knew it was at the beginning, something like that, right? That's about the best we're going to get. That's kind of why pipes and ampersands, dots, things like that are really not great in code fields in this product, because it's also used as a filtering construct in the system itself. So anyway, it doesn't matter. We've gotten to the right record. We see it says earnings and bonus, and now we're going to click on details under the navigate option. Okay, because this is just a code. I can certainly copy it. I have a copy button. I could copy this to 0701, just like we had with the method step definitions. Same thing here. So again, this just simply means that the base amount itself, called earned bond, will go ahead and be considered differently on just checks that start with a 7/1/15 date and on. That's what that really means, but I'm not going to tell them to delete that. But that's the impact of that. That does become applicable. You'll find it more applicable when we get to the bracket system. It'll make much more sense. So here we're going to go to the details, and I'm going to try to make the screen a little bit shorter here. And so what the system is doing is it's using this type filter, which is generally the first thing you fill in, and it can be further filtered by other constructs. And probably there's no other constructs filled in. Okay, 2 and 3 in our payroll control conversations, we showed you the drop down of the payroll control type. Remember, it was 0 for paid hours and 1 for, I don't even remember, hours maybe, 2 for earnings, 3 for bonus. And so what it's really based on, quite honestly, is this drop down right here. And that's that type field that we were looking at earlier in our earlier conversation. And so what we really are thinking about is thinking if paid hours is a 0, 1 is the next, and so forth. So 2 and 3 is earnings and bonus. Okay, if I were to click just so say earnings here, and I can click again, I can go or bonus. So I can use this little helper to construct these on its own. Okay, and we're going to explain more complicated base amounts as we get in, but this one is just simply looking for earnings and bonus. So let's go back to our payroll control now, to our PIA. Oh, come on, where is our ATPIA? There she blows. Okay, navigate. Calc method, steps. We're going to fill in that description, hopefully remember. Okay, so what that says to the system is, now that we understand that, it basically says adjust is increased by base amount. When it says base amount, and sometimes you'll get base amount like LTD, MTD, or YTD, or to date, or some other choices. But when it's base amount by itself, what they really mean is this transaction, this check. So as the system is processing, it is going through, and when it hits this line of code, it says, okay, let me go out and figure out what earned bonus is. Let me go into the journal for just this one employee. Let me go set filters and find exactly based on the filter constructs you established, in this case 2 and 3, and let me get all the records, and let's add all the payroll amounts up. And that's the key part of that, and let's stuff it into the adjusted column. Adjusted is increased by the payroll journal lines for the field called payroll amount for records that are defined by the base amount code. So I'm giving you a little bit more lengthy explanation now about exactly what it's actually doing. So it's actually simply going through this particular journal and finding, again, in the payroll amount column, which is the amount column, it's the paycheck amount column, it's looking for earnings and bonus. It's added all together and taking that net number and putting it in the adjusted. And that's all it's doing. So the next thing it's doing, and this next step, if you will, says what? Raise the exception flag if adjusted is 0. And the only way that you can kind of early abort a calculation, basically, pretty much, is to raise the exception flag. And so once you've done that, then you can run this next item here. Stop if, and my guess is it probably could have done maybe this, stop the calculation if amount is equal to 0. So I'm not sure. Maybe we could have just skipped having 2 steps here and just gone right to stop if amount is equal to 0. Because amount would be equal to 0 if the person let's say it's an hourly or per diem employee, has this deduction all set up, but they're having no earnings in this particular pay run. Then what I could do maybe is stop if amount is zero, and that should work. We can practice that if you like, but that's kind of, again, well, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think it could, but because the amount isn't zero. Whoops. Sorry about that. Stop it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, because remember the exception flag is being raised if the adjusted. So I think you would have to change this so that the amount is equal to the base amount before you can use that step. So you have to think about where your data is. In this case, the data is going to the adjusted amount, and so that method step that I was thinking of using, not that one, but the other one, sorry, it wouldn't work because it's not in amount. It's in the adjusted. So probably in kind of the way we thought it through, we said, well, we can stick it here. We can raise the exception flag because we see this method step. Raise the exception flag. You've adjusted as zero. Go ahead and stop it. So then this last one is zero the adjusted. All we're really doing there is clearing out the value. And by the way, the only reason that's being done is only if I'm continuing on. Because if the stop if exception occurred, it aborted and it's already gone on to the next thing. It's finished and gone on to the next control. But if it, let's say, does have earnings, it's good just to clean up yourself because you were just testing this. This is all just a simple test to see if this person just had earnings. And we've been copying these 4 lines into a lot of rate and bracket-based deductions just so that we don't get a lot of zero or negative net pay type of checks. And again, that can be mitigated by arrears tracking. One of the things that Brendan and we talked about yesterday is you can enable what's called arrears tracking so that the system would automatically kind of give them a zero check. So if, let's say, you didn't do this test and they really did have this deduction, you really let the deduction go through and then you move it to kind of like an employee loan. And then you then take it back from them when they start getting paid again. So NAV has that capability, K-12 has that capability, but this is kind of like aborting it, saying that if they don't have any earnings, it ain't going to happen. And that may not be what you want, but that's how I'm just telling you what this is doing. And then, okay, so once we get past these first 4 and we're still chugging, that means that the person did have earnings. And then all the system is doing now is it has this method step. Amount is emp rate. So it simply looks to the employee rate. Well, which rate? And that's what this guy is. And so let's kind of back off now a little bit on that. Well, I'll just open up the table interactively. I think it's probably just simpler. So this is the payroll rates page where you define them. Okay. We can edit the list if we want. And so to put a rate in, this edit stats, again, is not used. It's not used for anything. You can just remove that column and never have to worry about it. But what you do care about, let me just do that again. Show you a cleaner screen. You have to put in a code. You've got, unfortunately, only 10 characters to work with, I believe. I don't think you get 20. Yeah, I think you just get 10 characters, which I find sometimes a little low. The description is a little bit better. It's 30. And then the unit of measure. The unit of measure is a unit of measure table that you can put values in. So if you have a different unit of measure than what the list shows, you can go ahead and add values to that. It's not really used for any algorithmic uses. We have no algorithms that look at unit of measure. It's purely just a way to tell the operator during data entry when they pick that rate code, what unit of measure should they be thinking about. Is this a percent? Is this an hour per hour? Is this per pay? What is this? Anyway, so that's what the system is going to do. It's going to pick up whatever amount's on the employee record, and it's going to stuff it in there, and then it's going to switch the sign. And all this is really doing is amount is minus amount. So if we were to now go in and practice that a little bit on this particular deduction, let's go in and calculate somebody. And by the way, I will go ahead and put a description because it's bothering me. Amount is amp rate. And then what I would say, if non-zero, see how much I can fill in. There we go. Okay, that's how I would write it, because that fully expresses the fact that I am pulling an emp rate, but I'm also doing it if there's non-zero earnings, which so at a quick glance I can kind of say, oh, I've got that test on. That's interesting. As opposed to, again, using maybe the arrears tracking. The arrears tracking is all controlled by here, where we just go ahead and put in arrears tracking, and then we have to have another payroll control, basically, that's going to get that value and take it somewhere else, meaning that when the payroll system calculates, they have no earnings, they now have a negative amount of, let's say, $15, you're going to kind of loan them the money in some sense. You're still going to report it to the vendor and all that stuff as if they paid it, and you're going to put it somewhere else that you can then recoup it later on for that employee when they come back to work. And you see it a lot with maybe child support, maybe or not, but probably you'll see it with maybe medical, medical when they're on extended leave, things like that. So again, we have a lot of those capabilities, and we can have a separate session if you guys want on just arrears tracking and how to set that up at a later date. Okay. So let's go to an employee. This is where I will have a little bit of information that's at the employee level. Bill show up because we're going to actually go into the payroll journal. Okay, what I want to do is calculate just any old person, not any old person, but a person. So it's defaulting the pay period, recalculate, no, resort, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. That's going to pick, like, hopefully I got a job title in here, and I'm going to pick a teacher. All right, hopefully we'll get a calculation. One warning, I'm not worried about that. Okay, and the P is right there. There she is, 4389. So I want to show you how to trace. Okay, first and foremost is, and I'm not going to go to that screen, but in the user setup card, whoever's going to be tracing has to have a checkbox check that says allow payroll trace, I think is what it says, something to that effect. So that has to be checked. If it's not checked, when I go and I sit there and I calculate single employees, an example, this whole section won't appear. You won't even see it. It's not like you can't even click on it. You don't see it. So if you don't see this, that means that it's not set up in user setup. I'm going to go ahead and put in the code now, and I can't remember what the code's called, ATPIA. So ATPIA. Okay. Hit OK. Does everything fine, nothing different, but then under actions, we can view trace. Okay, and now this should make some sense to you guys because you're professional payroll control designers. Everything should start making sense. So add base amount adjusted. If you remember, increases adjusted by that amount. Exception flag if adjust equals 0. Stop if except. 0 the adjusted. So you can see that last fourth line is zeroing it out. Amount is emp rate. You can see it coming into that first column, and then you can see the sign being flipped. Okay, you see the 4 columns, payroll amount, taxable amount, adjusted amount, and temp amount. The actual exception flag is not being raised, and so forth. So, again, if the exception flag is raised, and I'm trying to think how I could even get it to be raised, I guess what I'd have to do is I'd have to manually come in here and do 0 here. Let's just try that. And I'm going to go and recalculate single employee and retrace. Okay, I get basically a 0 record, but I believe the view trace will still be on. Okay, then it never wrote the other lines out because it never got there. So the trace ended because the exception flag was in fact thrown. Okay, I'll go ahead and put some dollars back in there. I think it was $2,000 approximately. And we'll calc single employee, and of course I can trace again if I want to, don't have to, and then I can view the trace, and of course it's going to be back the way it was. So that's simple one, okay. Let's now go to maybe a more complicated one. Let's go to Earn Cont Sal actually, because Earn Cont Sal I think is an interesting one. And so at this point I'm going to kind of stay within this one person and kind of work backwards a little bit to get to the controls, just to kind of make it simple for us. So I'm going to go to Earn Cont Sal, opens up the screen in the right place, calc method. And you can see a change was made actually on this one as an example, back in time. Okay, and we're going to take a look at this one. So this one's very, very simple, and this is a little bit of an example where we pretty much wrote a bunch of code under a new step that we invented, and therefore by picking the one step, it's like a superfood. It just kind of does everything it needs to do, basically. So let's kind of take a look at what this one at least says. Amount is employee job rate, active only. What that means active only, active jobs only. One of the things that it does is, remember, it's actually going through earn cont sal. It's in the master calc order. It's looking at earn cont sal, and basically it's working backwards. It's going out and saying, okay, let me find a non-block job that is within, if you will, the gates of the start date, payroll start date and payroll end date are on both sides of the check date of the payroll run that's being calculated, that's not blocked, and there isn't multiples. And I know one of the limitations you guys are probably already aware of is the fact that you cannot have the earn cont sal twice on a salary job on the same employee active with the same dates, or not same dates, but basically open to the dates, if you will, at the same time. The system will error out. It will search for that, find that, and give you an error. So I think it's important that if you do have a secondary salary job, you use like an earn sal 1, earn sal 2, earn sal 3, and so forth. And I think you guys have those already established. I think that's an area that we may be able to expand and maybe change differently at some point. But right now, that's kind of how it's designed on purpose. Okay, so that's all that one does, and it basically automatically goes out, as I said, and pulls the job rate. The job rate is the pay period amount. End of story. So it's not pulling the pay rate, it's pulling the pay period amount is what it's doing. This guy here just says amount is limited by the employee job contract. So whenever job is found, it's now looking at the contract limit, it's calculating pay to date and doc to date, and it's calculating what it's already just pulled. And it's saying, well, is this amount going to cause me to make it so that the contract limit is fully used, meaning the contract is over. And if it can't use all of it, it'll use some of it. If it can't use any of it, it will use none of it. Or it could use all of it. I mean, it basically makes that decision at that point. So if they have $2,000 and there's only $19.99 left in their contract, it will get it to be $19.99 and come to their contract at the even penny. So that's generally what it's going to do. It's not going to really ever go over unless you don't have this step in there. If you don't have this step, then it just continues on forever. It doesn't know better. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. Contract is limit is generally put in there where amount is job rate. So that's generally, you see them as a paired set. But you don't have to. And the reason that's the case is that sometimes that earn sal 2, earn sal 3, they really don't have contract limits on them. That's not really what they're designed to do, and they're not designed to automatically shut off, and they're kind of just some other kind of thing. So that's why we give the option, right? Everything's about options and what you want to do. Okay, so that's earn cont sal, general way we do it. Pre-tax medical, so I think in Ohio, I think we're using union stuff, so let's kind of take a look at this one here and see what we got. Let's see what we got. All right, everybody's sitting on the edge of their seats, I'm sure. All right, well, this one's not too bad. Okay, the first 4 we all know now, so we're going to ignore them. Hopefully you don't even look at them, because after a certain point you become sort of, immune to them. Again, we're just testing to see if there's earnings. After that, amount is deduction. Okay, so this gets us to something new now, which are brackets. And then even something beyond that, which is payroll rate coming from a union. So let's kind of at least discuss both of these, and then we're going to go to medical, and then we're going to talk about this track filing status. So amount is deduction. Amount is minus bracket amount using filing status. So what that is going to do is it's going to pull an amount from a bracket, okay? We're going to show you what that means, based on the filing status of this employee. Okay, that's one thing it's going to do. It's going to change the sign, so the bracket amount is now expressed as a positive number, but it's going to come in as a negative, so it is doing everything at once. That's good. We like that. But what it's going to also do, which is actually not told there, is it's going to prorate. And I just happen to know that, and that's one of the things that sometimes, unfortunately, these steps aren't as documented as well as they probably could be. But I can tell you that anybody that's used amount as deduction before knows that it's going to do a proration. The idea there is that you're a 24-month employee, and you then would load in, and you're going to do it each pay period, let's just pretend. Then the system is going to see the 24 based on the pay cycles and assumes that the amount you put in is the annual amount for single or family or parent plus child, whatever, and it's going to divide that by 24. Can it divide by something different than the pay cycles? Yes, and it can automatically do that, and I'll show you that as well. And so that's a little bit more of a functional discussion now, but you need to know that. As a designer here, you need to know that amount as deduction is going to prorate, and when it prorates, it's going to use either the pay cycles or it's going to use the override. And the override's on the other auth record, which comes from the reporting authority. So let's step back a little bit, and we'll come back to this union one as well. But let's go look at the medical one. But I'm going to close the screen completely because I want you to see where it is on the menu. Okay, there it is. So rates were the employee rates we looked at earlier, okay, but this is now brackets and base amounts. You can see why these three are important. Activations we're not going to discuss. We already talked about all these method steps and control groups and calc orders we fully covered last time. So let's go to brackets. Okay, this is where all the brackets live. And again, I'm only interested in this conversation with the one I'm interested in, but we'll come later and look at others. So we're going to go medical. Okay, and we see medical 6/1/2014. So any check date that's going to be 6/1/14 and after is going to be using this one. It's kind of misspelled, but it's still, you get the idea. So we're going to go ahead and get into the details of it. Okay, and there they are. So in this example, and let's just talk about that. Remember I told you that there are different bracket types? So the different bracket types, the system knows by definition that these are the only columns, if you will, that are potentially doable or usable with this type of a bracket, with a bracket that's a deduction bracket. If I pick a withholding bracket, I believe the columns will be different. Yeah, you get this amount over one coming in. And maximum withholding, lump sum, and you just get different stuff. If you get the limit and tax percent one, you're start getting completely different columns. So if you do a quantity-based one, what is quantity tier? I'm going to do a quantity. You get a much simpler one. So again, that's what I was trying to say to you guys. Don't go and try to show and hide columns here. If you do that, you'll see you can't, because you can see the system is in control. It's not you that in terms of which ones you're seeing. And it's based on the type. And again, don't fight it. If you actually don't have a column you think you should have, you probably are on the wrong bracket type, and you need to rethink it through. So I find that to be pretty consistent. I used to try to break into it sometimes and try to muck with it. It never worked. I always got a dead end. It was like, oh, it was a big waste of time. So I've given up on that. On this one, the system where it says amount is deduction is just simply using that fifth column amount. It's not really using minimum amounts, maximum amounts. There's other steps that look at deduction brackets that might use that. That's what makes this a little bit more complicated than normal. So every method step kind of can use different columns, but to suffice to say, it will not use any columns that aren't on the screen. and every method step doesn't use every column that's on the screen either, so that's the kind of point here. Those are annual amounts. The system is going to do the division as we discussed. It's going to automatically prorate. The only difference is that you can override that at the employee level. So let's kind of switch over now back to my payroll journal, back to my little guinea pig. Okay, and PT Medical. So in here, I just want to go to her card real quick and look at her other auth record. For the medical, okay? So the system is looking here. It's looking at that filing status, which you saw row 4 already, and you see the proration cycles is 0. So what the system is doing is it's taking an annual amount. This is cert EE. And so if we kind of work backwards, let's just kind of go all the way backwards. Cert EE. Okay, we're going back to our brackets, doing this following scientific methodologies here to verify this data is correct. And we're writing down cert EE, and we're seeing 5574.72. Now, we also need to then know, I need to know what kind of payroll this is, in terms of, if I go to calculate and just remind myself, this is, no, not there, sorry, go to calculate. All right, so this is a semi-monthly, okay. So, seems to me what it would simply do would be divide by 24. Now, the only thing is, I know that's not right because, and again, we're looking at the PT accrual but it has to be multiplied. Well, let's just kind of follow it through. So let me go ahead and hit a calculator on here, and we'll go 5574.72. We'll divide this by 24, and we're getting $232.28. What I believe that to be is, by the way, the premium amount. I believe the amount that was entered into that bracket is actually the premium amount. So again, a little bit lesson learned in the sense that, this bracket that we're using, this medical bracket, is we're actually using the bracket to imply the total premium amount, and we're using our union capabilities to split it between employee and employer. So really, when we talk about this description of medical accrual amounts, I find that to be a little bit confusing. It really should be medical premium amounts, because that would tell us that that's what we expect you to put in here, is the premium amount. This is the total premium amount, including employee and employer. So again, be careful how you describe things. If I'm true, and I think I am, that this is supposed to be the total premium amount, I would call it that, just so to remind us. It's not just the accrual amount, which I would interpret as being the employer amounts, and so forth. All right, let's go to the back to the same payroll processing. Let's go to the next part of this journey on this one control, which is the union portion of this. And let's see how that's working. Okay, navigate, steps. Okay, so amount times union by 100 minus. So let me understand that. And what that is saying is amount is minus 100. So what that really is if you look at the one above it, when we're in a few minutes, we're going to trace for this employee what union they're in, and we're going to look at a rate. The first one is going to use that rate as is, and the second one, the one that has the 100 minus, is the reciprocal, so that if the first one's 85%, then this one will be 15. The other one's 90%, this one will be 10. So that's kind of what we're doing. And so the style, the way this is done, is that they've entered in the employer portion as the percent, and they're using the reciprocal for the employee, which is fine. It doesn't matter which way you do it. So that's kind of how we're doing it. So this rate code here has to be entered in now. Union Medical Board percent, which would make sense. Okay? And let's now go to our employee's card. We're going to go to the union code, which I always forget where that is. I think the administration tab, right? Cert full. And we're going to click on rates. And we're going to now see 89%. Okay? And then, of course, everybody that's in the crowd that's experts here thinks 11%. So the employee is going to bear 11%. The employer is going to bear 89%. Okay, so the system should resolve ourselves, because I got down to $232. I'm going to hit my calculate button again, which is where, there she blows. And we're going to go 232.28 times 0.11. I get $25.55. Ha! Bingo. And then the other guy here, 206.73, would be again 232.28 times 0.89, 206.73, 206.73. So, and let's do some tracing, right? Because, since we're experts in tracing now, why don't we just see it in its trace? So we'll go ahead and calc single employee. We'll go ahead and now replace this. Okay, we'll view the trace. Okay, there's my test again. We know those first four lines. We see the 232.28, and we see the 25.55. Again, we don't necessarily see the math going on necessarily. It doesn't tell us that that was 11%. It just tells us what rate code was used. So it kind of just basically gives you the parameters, if you will, that track that. The last point I want to make on this particular control, which I feel is important, is track filing status. So if you guys remember, those that are paying attention to this, there's a checkbox here called track filing status, and it's checked. Okay, what does that do? So we found over time that from a historical perspective, it would be nice if both in the journal and the ledger, we actually knew what filing status the transactions were. So even though the filing status is needed to do the computation, it's also nice to be able to track it into the history. And we can use that for many other things, many reporting needs and other kinds of calculations down the line. So it's kind of nice to do that. And so we invented that at K-12. That was not part of the base product, but we think that's been a very useful feature. Where you would see that would be if I go back to my journal and go look at my columns. I believe that the filing status code is a hidden column, and I'll just go ahead and add it to the very end. Okay, and if I just use my end key, there it is. And actually you can see it filled in on all the controls that have it filled in. Okay, so that's kind of nice. You don't really see it in the trace, but you can see it right here, and it is nice to have that be part of the process. And so I do invite you to, if it's in a bracket and it's based on filing status, click the track. I have to remember now, I'm trying to think, because there's occasionally, I think FIT might be a good one. Let's just go ahead and look at the FIT calculation real quick and also see what's tracked on that one as well. This might illustrate my next point. All right, no, it's not clicked right now. So maybe what we'll do is, and let's just confirm. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but I want to just kind of confirm that FIT is blank. Okay, notice it's blank. I'm going to make a change to it, and then we're going to recalc and see if it makes a difference. Okay, navigate, calc method, FIT steps. Okay, so here's the question it's like, well, when does the system, which bracket do I click? Because I've got different ones here going on. I've got bracket 3 different times. What the heck is going on? I don't really understand all this, and so forth and so on. So, and we do a little bit of commenting here that helps to sort of tell you what it's doing, but still might not help you. So, we can break this down, but I think before I go much further, I'm going to go ahead and apply the tax brackets. I think it's that one that should be clicked. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. We're going to run just a quick recalc, see if that works. I'm going to actually simultaneously trace it. Okay, so there you go, married. Beautiful. Let's go and view the trace. All righty, so maybe we actually can see it this way a little bit easier than actually trying to just look at it in its sort of, its own. Add base amount. So add base amount goes through, and it determines what that base amount is, and let's see if we can look at this. Yeah, we can. Good. So if I go in here, earnings bonus, pre-tax, perfect, navigate details. So now you are experts at this. So now you're picking 2, 3, and 8. 2, 3, and 8, and with any filters, no other filters. So every single 2 and 3, which means earnings and bonus, and 8, which everybody in this call must know, that's pre-tax deductions. So every pre-tax deduction, as long as it's marked pre-tax deduction, is going to be removed. Since the sign is negative and earnings are positive, it's going to give you a net number. So this number here that we see in this trace, that 1670.14, is the employee's net amount, and that actually should make its way to taxable amount. So if I click on here, notice that's the taxable amount as well. Okay, and by the way, they made $2,000. So what's going on here? Well, all these pre-tax deductions are being removed. And so I'm sure that if I net 2,000 minus all that stuff, I'd get to 1670. I'm not going to do the math. I just feel very confident that's the case. And by the way, this further illustrates our calc order issue. So that's why FIT has to be after your pre-tax because, well, it's kind of obvious. How is it going to know about this other stuff before it gets to that one line? And so things have to be known ahead of time. Otherwise, it just won't work. Okay, let's go back to our trace. And view trace. Okay. So first add base amount, stop if tax exempt. What that does there is it actually goes and finds the federal based on the authority code of the control federal. It goes to the tax status. And so what we are talking about here is if I go to navigate, I go to card, and I go to tax auth info, and I were to take her and make her income tax exempt, and I would recalculate her with the FIT being traced again. Okay, her FIT is 0. Okay, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have to pay. She doesn't have it as a liability. It just means that she's exempt from having it withheld. And so if I now trace, you actually see what happened. So stop if tax exempt didn't mean though that she lost that taxable amount. It just, because again, you'd have to do some more work to get that to happen. So it is still taxable. It's just, stopped if tax exempt. So I'm going to go ahead and switch her back because otherwise we can't do anything else. So we're kind of stuck. If anybody disagrees with any of this, let me know. My stance on that. All right, let's calc again. And let's trace again. And let's view trace. All right, continuing on. So that's what that second line was about. Adjusted is taxable. We all know that just simply is a simple movement where adjusted is equal to taxable. And by the way, the bold is actually highlighting what was just updated, which I think is actually nice for the eye to see. Okay, now we're taking a standard deduction. She had one exemption, I believe, on her screen. And so the system is doing a standard deduction. Let's go ahead and read let's see if I can. Adjusted is reduced by bracket amount or per allowance, no filing status. All right, so I'm not sure exactly what all that means, but the system is looking here at this bracket. Not this bracket, sorry, this bracket here. I'm clicking the wrong button. So let's go to this bracket here. Okay, notice there's two. So again, we want to get to the one that's applicable. So $39.50. Okay, so $39.50 per allowance. And again, that's probably the way the federal regulations are written. What the system is doing, though, it's reducing the $16.70 by, what was that number again, anybody? I didn't notice it myself. Was it $39.50? $39.50? It's doing that, though, by, I'm thinking, sorry, I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. $39.50, oh, sorry. $39.50. Why is it not $39.50? I'll just type it manually. Divided by 24. It's $164. Does that look about right? Let me just say minus 16.70. I'm just kind of getting close. Yeah, okay, that's right. So basically what it's doing is it's taking the $39.50, it's taking it prorationally, if you will, divided by the 24 again, and coming up with now an adjusted value. Temp is adjusted, so it's moving into the temp, so it's just copying it over. Exempt other status, so this is, I guess, doing something else. Let's see what this guy does. This is residential. I'm not sure what this is. Non-resident adjustment. There must be something that connects to that. I'm not sure much about what that is. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is for different kinds of filing statuses for different folks that we're not normally going to be dealing with. So probably this had no effect. Let's just see. Yeah, it looks like it had no effect on anything, which is kind of fine. Negative adjusted is changing the sign there. Add temp to adjusted. All right, well, temp to adjusted is zeroing it back out. As you can see, that's all that really did. Add temp to adjusted again. Seems to move it back in. So between you and me, I don't know really what that did. I mean, if you look at this line versus this line, they're the same. So I'm not really sure exactly why we did all that. Apply the tax brackets. Okay, so now the system is actually applying the tax brackets and computing the tax from that basis, that adjusted amount, if you will. I mean, this is still reported as their box 1 for W-2 purposes, but for computational purposes, when they do their 1040, they're going to have these exemptions, and so the system is computing the tax from that. Where it's getting that from is this guy right here. So let's just go to him or her. There it is. We'll go to the correct one. And this should be, she was married, remember, so she's really only looking at this one right here. And the system is simply doing this. This should tie to your circular E. This is what gets updated every year, of course, if it does change. And it's doing all that math. So this particular type of withholding is going to go ahead and use the amount over the tax percent and the tax amount. All that will be in play, basically, as it computes the amount. It computes the amount and does the proration interactively. So even though A lot of this is done on an annual way. It kind of takes it actually, when you actually look at the algorithm, it takes 1670.14 and multiplies that by 24. Actually, sorry, 1505.56 probably is what it takes. And multiplies that by 24, puts that through the algorithm, gets a result, and then divides it right back by 24. So that's where it gets the 132,208.05. You see extra withholding, okay? Okay, if we simply go and we go to Navigate Card, and we go to Tax Auth Info, and we add $10. Whoops, I need to turn my numlock off. Aha, no wonder I wasn't getting anywhere before. Okay, come back. Let's go ahead and calculate single employee. We'll go ahead and trace one more time. FIT, I'm assuming just changed, which it did. And view, and there it is. And so you see the $10 being added. So I know it sounds like a lot of steps. Some of them in the middle there I didn't understand exactly what the heck it was doing. I think it related to the fact if you have that exemption under status for EIC and so forth, which we normally don't have. So, but that's a more complicated one, obviously. Let me think of other ones you guys use. STRS, probably actually a little bit easier because I think that one's kind of automated in a way. So let's just take a look at that one. Yeah. Again, it was so complicated for you guys in Ohio, and I'm sure you appreciate this. It's kind of similar to our EMPA's job rate, is that there's just about 150 lines of code that run to go compute that. We're required to do pickup on pickup and do all these other algorithms based on lots of different scenarios. So all that code is kind of contained in one place. Doesn't give you much transparency to that code, I agree. But basically that's just kind of what we're doing. I do believe that when you configure that guy, there is more to set up than just that. So let me kind of go in and look at it. Yeah, so what's unusual about this, for people that have been doing this a long time, it's very rare that on a method step you would actually enter a base amount and a rate code. And so that's basically the way it works, is that, again, it's a very kind of, superfood kind of method step, which does all this code in turn, but it needs to understand how do I define Ohio STRS earnings, and then what rate code is being used for that employee. And in Ohio, we have to have rates at the employee level. We can't bracket it because there's deals cut with not every employee, but lots of employees, where the board is picking up different amounts, different percentages with different employees, and therefore it's kind of almost employee-based. And so it makes it more difficult, but it is just kind of the way it is based on Ohio and some of the rules within Ohio, and that's what kind of caused that. But we don't see that in Pennsylvania. They're not allowed to sort of cut those deals, so that's why it's a little bit more. It's all bracket based, if you will. There is a grandfathering concept depending on when you joined in. You have maybe less employee than others, less employee rate. Okay, let's look at some other controls that are interesting. Ohio SIT, I don't know how complicated that one is, so I will just kind of take a look at it. Let's just take a look at how bad that one is. Hopefully not too horrible. No, not too bad. I actually can make sense of that one almost immediately. Add base amount, okay. Now, base amount is earned in pre-tax. That one's a little bit different, and I don't know if anybody notices that, but that amount is different than the 1,500 that we are getting here, right? Oh, no, I guess it's the same. I must have made some changes at one time. Okay, so Ohio is using, I guess, the same base amount in the sense that the pre-tax is 100% the pre-tax. What that means is that Ohio is it is recognizing the deduction for the retirement when computing its basis, and that's an important thing to make sure you think about and understand that. Stop if tax exempt, adjusted as taxable, do the standard deductions, apply a tax bracket, extra withholding. That's actually a very, very, very classic tax algorithm. Federal used to look like that, quite honestly, but now it doesn't because it's gotten more complicated. So that's a real straightforward one right there. What do you need to worry about? Well, you have the exemptions, and you have the withholding. So really, if you think about it, if it comes in, and again, we can help you with this, but if they come in and say it's going up to 660, right? All you simply do and say as of January 1 at 660 is come in here, copy, 010115, let's just pretend. Okay, come in here, navigate, detail, 660. And now you've increased the standard deduction to 660. I'll go ahead and delete that because somebody might be testing kind of. That's all you do. In terms of the other one, and by the way, when I look up here, notice that the drop down is only looking at ones that are deduction. If I do this one, it's going to only look at ones that are withholding. So I just want to kind of show you how that works. Again, it's all pre-filtered that way. Here I've got two. It changed to this point right here, details. But again, same thing. If all this data changes, it only is but once a year. You just hit the copy button, you make the changes, just verify, do a couple tests, and you're good to go. So that's kind of what we do. We can import this. There is an electronic import of this data, so that's how we move this data around and get it to sort of automatically update. And so we certainly will prepare that, I am sure, when it changes in Ohio. But I'm just making the point. It's all just right here. There's no reason why you couldn't do it yourself. It's really very straightforward. Medicare should be real straightforward as well. So we'll go ahead and just trace a Medicare one. All right. You guys don't do Social Security for the most part, so it's not all that exciting for you. Oh, my God, Medicare is more complicated. Holy cow. I hope that's right. Okay, let's kind of study it a little bit. I know we're trying to achieve is we're trying to get to the earnings and bonus and pre-tax deductions, and we're defining pre-tax deductions a little bit different because pre-tax deductions in this case can't include your Social Security, your retirement withholding, so you're not going to get a reduction for that. And so this is giving you a higher basis. Let's sort of look at this pre-tax deduction base amount. This is an important part of this. So if I go to one's called pre-tax deductions, 8. And there we go. So this is a little bit complicated, but it is effective. What basically it says is go ahead and give me the payroll controls that are pre-tax deduction in which the payroll control code is not equal to something that starts with 3 letters of ANN, in which the retirement category filter is blank. So let's model that as an example. So let's do this. Let's just for a second, we'll come back to this trace. Okay, what I want to do is go to the payroll controls. Actually, I was right there. And I want to put that filter in. So if we go type pre-tax deductions, perfect. Notice that the STRS is showing up. There it is. Okay, I'm going to add code not equal to ANN asterisk, right? That's what we saw. Okay, they all just disappeared. Still got some problems on our hands because we saw that. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the retirement code, which is not on here, but is on here if I just kind of go. Two single quotes. Okay. So actually, I guess, inquisitive minds, Dan, I don't know if you saw that. I don't know, he's paused right now. But, STRS PT buyback is now actually considered and is actually being used, at least in this test database for Perkins, as a reduction for Medicare. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. So that could be an issue that we might need to focus on. The reason it's probably like that is because it probably doesn't have an STRS code. Well, we know it doesn't, because otherwise it wouldn't have showed up here. Okay, and that would be in the K-12E tab under right here. Okay, so that could be a question. You guys can pursue that separately, but I'm just trying to show you how the system is thinking relative to including or excluding the retirement deductions when computing something like Medicare. I'm not sure I can view trace right now. The trace is empty. The reason it's empty is it actually was a temp table. It actually didn't really exist. It only exists while you were in this screen. As soon as you close the screen, it actually is not there. So just kind of just a little lesson there. So we're going to rewrite it again, and then we're going to view trace. Okay. All right, so let me see if I can figure this out myself. Add base amount. We know what that does, right? Okay, then it's add base amount. Let's just look at base amount again, just to make sure we understand that taxable is increased by base amount. Okay, so if we think about it, then the system is computing pre-tax deductions, and it's reducing the $2,000 by that amount, and so that's like $68 and some change, which is the sum of, I guess, those numbers. Well, no, it's not the annuity. Sorry. There you go. Is that right? No, it's not right, because that's not a pre-tax deduction. This is not a pre-tax deduction. So I actually lied. It's actually those three numbers. Pre-tax deductions and only those pre-tax deductions. So that's where those numbers are coming from. It's getting this 2,000 minus 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 is where that's coming from. Okay? Okay, so just want you to know where that's coming from. Okay, so here, add base year-to-date adjustment. I'm not sure what that's doing, so let's just kind of look. Adjusts increase by base amount year-to-date. Earning and bonus. Adjusted is increased. Yeah, what's confusing me is why did I have a dollar value there? This would have been a year-to-date value that should have popped in there. Is it possible that I don't have any history with this person? Let me just see something here. Oh, I know, because I'm in 2015.
So this is the first payroll of the year?
Yeah, because I'm in 2015. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just see if I can just change this real quick, and then just tell it to recalculate and see what it does. Calculate single employee. I'm just going to force it back to period 12 and trace again. All right, I think I got my data still showing up. Okay, yeah. So it didn't have anything year to date. So now what it's doing is again, I don't even understand this myself, so I'm literally just reading this on my own. So feel free, whoever's got all the skills in place, to help me with this. So what we're doing here is, as we said before, this is basically adjusted as increased, and since it was started at 0, it's going to be equal to whatever this calculation, which is basically earnings and bonus year to date. That's what that's going to put in there. Then it's going ahead and it's doing the same thing for year-to-date pre-tax. So it's taking all the pre-tax deductions that it sees in the ledger and reducing that. Okay? Then we're doing this guy, which does what? Taxable is increased by adjusted. Taxable is increased by adjusted. So it's simply adding those two together and give me a result. So that seems about right. Let's see, 14 and 21 is 35, so that's very reasonable. So now it's got another number. Taxable minus limit, okay? Taxable is reduced by the bracket limit as defined by this bracket right here. And I think it's just this one right here that we're on. $200,000. So I think what it would have done is if this was minus $215,000, this would have been changed to $200,000. Okay, so that's what it would have done. But it didn't need to do that, so then it just continues on. So the amount is limited. Then 0 negative taxable. Okay, let's read what that is. Taxable is 0 if taxable is a negative number. So I guess what would happen is, let me just think about this. Taxable is minus limit. Let me see. Taxable is reduced by the bracket limit. Oh, I guess it's actually reduced by the bracket limit. I got it. So if this was $210,000, this would have been $10,000. I see. So this actually took this number minus 200,000 and gave me a negative 167. And so because it's negative, it doesn't have a problem. It's zeroing it out. That's kind of what we're doing here. Then we're basically throwing the exception flag if taxable is equal to 0, which we then threw the exception flag. Let's see if that does anything for us. Adjusted is taxable. Okay, so adjusted equals taxable, zero taxable. Seems like everything is pretty much, except for the exception flag, all zeroed out at this point. Then it seems to come back and add base amount with the pre-tax deductions, save taxable times tax rate, stop if exempt. Okay, stop if exception flag was thrown. I guess if they're over the 200,000. So I didn't realize, I mean, it seems like a very complicated way to go and do all this calculation. I'm just not sure why it's so complicated. But is that way Medicare works now? Is that you don't pay over $200,000? I thought it was like forever, but maybe I'm out of date on that one. So anyway, so that's a complicated one. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to me. I feel like we could probably all as a group write it more simply. But that's what that one's doing. It'd be interesting to actually do a calculation on ER and see if it's much different. Ooh, ER. Nope. So I guess what happens is the employee is limited by the 200,000 of earnings at one point, whatever, 4 or 5, but the match goes on and on and on. So you, the employer, keep on paying once you go past 200,000. And of course, we know in school districts they're not getting paid over 200,000 every 5 minutes of the day. So this is probably why you guys don't even care about this conversation. But if it was maybe 80,000 or 70,000, you would care. So anyway, so this is a more simpler calculation. Add base amount, pre-tax deduction, multiplied by the rate, done. There's clearly no limit on this one at all. Okay, so that one kind of makes sense. Okay. Wow. Well, we're 90 minutes into this session, which is usually well, we still have half an hour, but I guess I'm trying to think what other ones should we show that are interesting. Net pay has its own calculation as well and so forth. I'm interested in just opening up to anybody on this call. If they want to see anything particular about a calculation, I could dig deeper into it. I'm just curious about feedback at this point. Anybody?
Anybody still awake?
I don't know. Brenda, you there? Are you up? Linda?
I am.
Well, I mean, does it seem, I mean, I can go into others. Let's just maybe, because this person doesn't have everything, right? So maybe I can just see if I can think of some others that might be interesting. The annuities, how do the annuities work? Let's just take Lincoln as an example. Let's just take something like Lincoln. So this one's a little bit more complicated. Again, with the first 4 lines are the same we've seen before. Amount is the employee rate. So that's just an amount you load on the employee card, and that's the payroll rate code. Switch the sign. But stop if amount is 0. I'm not sure if that's really necessary, that line. I'm not sure why that line is there. I'm trying to think. Maybe it is because of this next line. So this next line is a step that's actually interesting. Amount is limited by YTD amount using bracket limit. So what the system is saying is that from a setup perspective, and we probably could improve this, I suspect, based on their age, but it's a little complicated because I'm not sure it's their age as of the time the system is computing this. What we're talking about, I guess, is they're limited on how much they can contribute based on, I guess, whether they're 50 or above, doing the catch-up or not in the catch-up, basically. And so that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to stop them for a year exceeding the limit as defined by this particular bracket. So let's kind of look at the bracket real quick. And again, you may need to copy this each time with a different value. Okay, so it looks like, and I don't know why we have this, I guess it's 2 different reporting authorities, but the system will only see the records that relate to it. So I'm not completely sure I get those reporting authorities. Let me kind of look at the reporting authority of this control that we're on. Okay, it's GLP. These must be like the company that's providing this annuity. I don't know who that is, but GLP Strategic. Yeah, so that's probably what's going on there. Let me see. Whoops, I don't want to do that. Payroll control. annuity. Let's pick a different one. Pick American Fidelity one. Should all be the same. Yeah. So basically, it's going to be the same 4 records. So I guess basically we're using one bracket, and we're using it across 2 different sets of annuity controls set with 2 different reporting authorities, and the system is smart enough to only look up the right one. So in other words, what it does is it goes and looks for a tax auth record for that employee if it's active. Again, the key thing is that control active, defaults to be not active, and becomes active when you go ahead and put either the other auth record in or you put in the rate code, because both of them are really in the payroll control design. If I go backwards, you basically has both a rate code and has a bracket. So basically by putting the other auth record or putting the rate, it activates. That means that you have to fill in the other piece of that. Particularly the other auth. So if they put the rate in and they say, oh, $400 or whatever, and they don't put the other auth, you're going to get an error because the system is, now that it's active, it must find it. And what it's going to do is it's going to find the row based on the payroll control. So the payroll control is GLP, STR, then it's going to go and find a record with those 2 matching values. That value and then either TSA or, well, it's going to find the record and it's going to go find one or the other, TSA or TSA 50, and it's going to then apply that limit on it. So if we were to trace it, and we could do a simple trace by going back to our payroll journal. And does this person have an annuity? Yes. So if I just go and click on this now, and we calculate her, and we trace that, right. So it's applying the limit. You don't see the limit. You would just see it automatically changing that value. So if I were to change this to, let's just see. No, I don't think I can do it that way. Yeah, I was going to just manually change the value, but at that point it would override it, so it wouldn't work. I think the only way to change it would be just to go into their card. And let's just go ahead and change it to, is it this one right here, I think? Yeah, let's change it to 30,000. Just for the fun of it. We'll come here, we'll calc single employee. So notice it took 17,000, put us in a serious negative net pay situation. So there it was 30,000, but then it saw how much was taken so far this year and saw the limit, and it's adjusting that limit, I suspect, to get her right to that maximum amount based on her filing status. So that's kind of showing it being limited. Obviously, that's not a good thing to have a negative net pay. I'm sure she would not want to send that much in at the same time. Not that she can, but anyway, but you get the idea. So that's just kind of a way to see if a limit's working. I always fiddle with the data. Always, always, always. In your setup of control, fiddle with the extremes of it. Set up something really high, really low, whatever, and just see it work. See it trace. Feel comfortable and confident that it's actually going to meet your needs. Because, when you put limiting stuff on there, and how do you know it's going to work when the time comes? You got to test it. You got to trick it so that it will just tell you, yeah, it's working. Got it. Let me reset that back. Okay, I'm good to go, and so forth. So that's definitely highly advised. Yeah, so Brenda, tell me, anything confusing at this point, or you want me to go into a deeper area? Does this, I know it's one of those things I say you got to get on it to sort of play with it, but what is your thoughts?
I think it's okay right now, what you've covered.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we still need to go into other areas of the system, but they're kind of pretty major subjects. In other words, when we get into the task area, we still have to get into this whole section right here, particularly the RetroPay worksheet and the updates budgeting tool. But these are really kind of sessions onto themselves. We certainly could spend 2 hours on that alone, right?
Okay.
And then the retro worksheet we probably can put together with maybe a couple other things. But my feeling is that I feel like I want to kind of finish payroll controls. I don't know if Dan, James, Chris, Roxanne, any of you guys want to see anything more or explain more to Brenda, or Anything else, or we're all good? Everything was clear as mud.
No, I'm good. I'm good. There's still just, I can see from the calculations, I can see where it could get fairly complex. So I think I just need to play around with it.
Yeah, the key thing is knowing what you're trying to do, right? And that's half the battle, is knowing what the heck you're trying to build. And what I typically try to do is say to myself, okay, I'm going to need a bracket that's I kind of always say, do I have a control that's similar to it? And then I begin to dissect it, know it inside and out, and then I begin to use my copy paste. Sometimes I just rekey stuff in, whatever it is, to begin to get the components out there. It's kind of interesting because you have to do this in a many-step basis. You got to have let's say I need a rate, and I need a base amount, and I need a bracket. Well, you got to get those out there. You can't, until they're out there, you can't get it to work. So it's just these multiple steps you go through. But eventually, and as you start to trace it, and one thing to note, by the way, I want to say this to you, Brenda, is that when you're doing the calculate in the payroll journal, if it errors out, it doesn't really error out. It just basically just drops that payroll control and goes on to the next one, and then you see it because it comes up to that dialogue, if you will, and says it. Let me kind of explain a little bit more about that. I think this will help a little bit. There's a real fast little twist here. So if I come to, let's say, this guy right here, right? I feel bad for this woman anyway. So let's go switch over to her card. Let's go to her rate, and let's switch it back to something a little bit more mild. I'll say $30, whatever. But what I want to do is actually go to her other auth record, and I'm actually going to delete this record, this TSA dude right here. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to delete it. So now I want to show you two different ways to do this. So if I come in here and just, I'm going to copy that cell, and I'm going to calculate. Let's say I'm just doing a normal calculate, but I'm actually just doing it for that one employee. I think this is the one employee I'm doing. Yeah. Okay, good. Amanda Buck. All right. So notice what it says. One incomplete, processing errors, okay. Okay, and actually records just disappeared. If you notice, her annuity actually disappeared. So it's kind of an incomplete person, right? It's just incomplete. So where I could get to the errors would be to go in and say, show me my calculation errors. And in here, I've got that warning, which I could not find. But then I've got this guy right here, could not find, and let me see if I can get this to show up. Oh, gosh. The problem sometimes is this error messages these days on this newer Windows client, Oh my God. Yeah. So I was hoping a bubble would pop up so I could show it to you a little bit easier. Could not find the right combination of reporting authority and filing status. Okay, and Hartford EE. Okay, so it's kind of giving you lots of information. Maybe a little encrypted. I'm not trying to say it's not, but basically that's the message you're getting. The bracket detail does not exist. Probably is because, I don't know, probably the next line. I'm not sure really what it did after that, but that's your error that you got a problem with because I just deleted it, right? I just want to show you that if I calculate single employee in that situation, it gives me the error real. In other words, I really get the error bubbling back to the screen right then, right? Because the system says, why bother? If I'm calculating, the concept is I'm going through tons and tons of employees, so I'm going to go put those errors in kind of like a place for you to see them all at once. But if I'm just calculating one single employee, well, if I have a problem, I'm going to tell you right now. And here's the problem, and that's the problem you're getting, which basically is it cannot find the right combination of reporting authority and filing status.
Oops.
That's okay. So I just want to just kind of put this person back together again because Humpty Dumpty, I kind of mess with her so much. Poor Amanda. And I guess it was HAT Hartford. I think it was that one, right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. There we go. F5, boom, boom, calc single employee, whatever, and it should come in and finish right. Boom, done. So I guess my point, though, is in terms of error trapping and so forth, when you're testing, if you really want to get the errors kind of bubbling right to you, then focus more on calc single employee because you typically are just, you're just finding one guinea pig. I always typically have picked the top person in the record in the whole table. I pick alphabetically always the person with the A name, the end in the A. And the reason I did this is because if I mess it up, at least I knew it was always the same person. Sometimes we do, if you're in production, we mess with your counterpart in the payroll department. The person who you're mainly working with, because you tell her or him, look, if I mess somebody up, I'd rather mess you up than anybody else. And they usually readily agree with that. Sometimes they'll say, let's just set up a test employee and you can work with that person. That I don't love, because you may leave it active in such a way that all of a sudden a check is coming out of a real run. So I'm not so thrilled with that unless you're super careful. So you have to sort of think about what's the lesser of evils there. And again, you can be in the test database, but a lot of this is data. And the more you do it in test, the more you have to be flawless when you replicate it in production. And a lot of it is just, you're off to the side, working on a control. It's not really on for anybody because there's no rate in anybody. There's no other auth in anybody. You're kind of by yourself. You got your guinea pig employee. Eventually, when you feel good about it, then you're ready to put it kind of in the system in more of a mass way, which really simply means turn to the people at the district and say, okay, you're ready to rock and roll. Go ahead to it. Go have some fun. So that's just kind of a housekeeping issue, if you will. Do remember it has to go in your master calc order, has to get to the control group, has to be blown into the employee cards. All those things have to happen. So, again, the classic mistake is you've created a new control, you've got everything perfect, but nothing seems to happen. It's not coming in, it's not dropping in. That's because it's not in the master calc order, it's not in the control group, it has not been blown into employees. And, again, it has to be at the employee level. And so forth. So those are all things. And that checkbox calculate has to be on. So we've talked about all those already a few times now. So hopefully that's resonating. Anything else from the peanut gallery of ours, or you, Brenda? Anything else you want to talk about?
I'm good.
All right. In terms of our next timing, what is we want to get into the salary budget tool, and I imagine others from our own organization want to see that because that's pretty a critical factor. Calendar-wise, I look like I am in Canada all week, supposedly. So I'm going to be good the following week. Do you want to do like a Monday, Wednesday like we've been doing? Would that be useful?
Are you talking the 16th?
I'm talking 16th, 18th maybe, or...
We won't be here the 16th.
Okay. President's Day, yep.
Yep.
I'll be here. That'd be a perfect day to do it. Well, why don't we just put one date on the calendar, and why don't we just go ahead and just keep it on. Let's just do it on Tuesday and do a 2 to 4 slot on Tuesday.
Okay, I don't have to leave early that day.
Okay, then why don't we do Wednesday then? Are you better
Okay.
Wednesday?
Yeah, Wednesday works.
All right, Wednesday it is. No problem. All right, sounds good. I'll send it out for that Wednesday, and I'll include everybody else that's been on this invite all along, and whoever wants to join is certainly welcome. And Bill, you are